Good afternoon, it is time to start. I think people will come and perhaps go in between because there's still a number of events at engineering, I understand, and another faculty as part of the homecoming festival. It's great to have everyone here. It's a special occasion not only for the university but of course as part of the Discourse Café idea and understanding. Dus die universiteit se thuiskomsnaweek. It was the best Afrikaans I could find. English, the homecoming weekend, and it falls or it aligns with what happens in town currently with the Woordfeest. And this Discourse Café is part of the homecoming celebrations, but I suppose also part of the Woordfeest. Next week, from Monday until Thursday, there will be on sale Sabbath discourse conversations at the Woordfeest from 7 o'clock every evening in the Kaya at the corner of Reineveld and Victoria, now the infamous corner of Reineveld and Victoria, but I suppose historically as infamous as it is currently. But the idea remains the same, and that is to interact and discourse, and to protest in more than one way, or to protest with understanding and actions, and of course to protest as we have seen at our university campuses in a number of ways. This I see as part of a protest or idea of protesting, idea of thinking and engaging and countering ideas and thoughts, and I hope, Pierre, that it will be as exciting for you as it is currently within the higher education space in South Africa. It's great to have everyone here. I see a number of colleagues and students, and as I say, we might have guests coming a little bit later from the other venues. Welcome to Sibonela. It is his first official Discourse Café event as coordinator. Emily retired at the end of last year, and Sibonela takes over. I look forward to engage with both Sibonela and Pierre. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This Discourse Café, before it starts, I'd like to thank first the Alumni Office and CARES, our main sponsors, and the Pierre de Vos Institute. So our guest today actually doesn't need any introduction, but I'll say a few words as a way of introduction. So our guest is the Claude Leon Foundation Chair in Constitutional Governance and teaches in the area of Constitutional Law. He has a BCom Law, LLB, and LLM cum laude from the University of Stellenbosch, an LLM from Columbia University, New York, and an LLD from the University of Western Cape. He taught at the University of Western Cape from 1993 to 2009 and held a professorship at that institution from 2001. He is the chairperson of the board of the AIDS Legal Network and is a board member of Triangle Project. He writes a blog on social and political issues from a constitutional law perspective, which is widely read in content. I have to say I'm one of the people who read that blog more. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Pierre de Vos.
Thank you. Good afternoon, goeiemiddag. Do you want me to stand or sit? Is it? It's standing is very formal. Then I feel like I'm lecturing you. So I was asked to come and sort of, as they say in the jargon, avail myself for a discussion. But just to say a few words before we open it to everyone to chat. And I thought I'll talk a little bit about coming to the University of Stellenbosch as a student, because and reflecting a little bit about the difference between Stellenbosch now, 2016, and shall I say 1994. 1984. Yeah, that is long ago. I went to high school in a town called Polokwane. At the time it was called Pietersburg. It's now called Polokwane. I joke with a certain politician who wears a red beret that we are homeboys, because he's also from Polokwane, Julius Malema. And I came to Stellenbosch for two reasons. It's maybe for some of you it will be very strange to think that that could be the reason, but remember it was 1984. There was a lot of protest, a lot of what the National Party government of the day called unrest. So it might sound strange that one of the reasons I came to Stellenbosch was because I thought it was the most progressive Afrikaans university in South Africa at the time, which doesn't say much about all the other Afrikaans at the time, Afrikaans universities, but there was a perception that it was a little bit more possible here to be who you want to be, if you, of course, a white Afrikaans person like myself. So that was the first reason. The second reason was it also happened to be the Afrikaans university furthest away from my parents' house. So when I first said I was coming to Stellenbosch, they said, no, you can't go that far. So I said, okay, then I'll go to Wits. And then my father said, okay, let's just write for the for the documents so that we can take you to Stellenbosch. I didn't know anything about Stellenbosch, except that I had this idea that, oh, it was a little bit more progressive than the other universities at the time that was teaching students in Afrikaans, white universities teaching in Afrikaans. And so I had to choose a residence. So I looked on the map. I was going to study law. Oh, the law faculty is in the hoof gebouw. So the closest residence is Wilgenhof. So I ticked the box. I said, yes, I want to come to Wilgenhof. And then I was deposited here by my parents in Wilgenhof. And then all hell broke loose because there was a very hectic orientation. Yes, so, yes, it wasn't very pleasant. So I thought, what the hell am I doing here? I thought it was going to be a more progressive institution. And at least in the first year, I don't think I experienced Stellenbosch, even as a white Afrikaans person, I didn't experience it as a particularly welcoming place. I was, perhaps because I'm a little bit different, I didn't know at the time yet, but I was gay, I was like, I read poetry, I was not good at playing rugby, all those things that would make you fit in some way. I read books, I knew who Ingrid Jonker was, so those kind of things was a bit weird for people here. And I didn't feel at home at all until I started working at the student newspaper, the Mati. And I worked my way up at the Mati. I think maybe I'm the only person who was ever appointed to the Mati as the editor, and then my appointment was vetoed by the university authorities. They said I'm too radical, because from arriving here to the time that I was going to become the editor of the Mati, which I never did, I sort of became a little bit more politically active. We invited speakers, people like, at the time he was very radical, Trevor Manuel. He had just come out of detention. He had been in detention for several years or several months. Archbishop Tutu, Alan Busak, and so on. And so, listening to these people, it's like, oh my God, there's some other things going on in the world that me, a little white Afrikaans boy from Pietersburg, Polokwane, didn't know about at all. So luckily I got my revenge, and because I couldn't become the editor, so I became the deputy editor, and I wrote a column called Perspectieve en Dinge. I don't know if they still have it in the Mati. And I made a lot of trouble. Every week I wrote the most incendiary things. I was in the Vice-Chancellor's office twice, where he threatened to expel me from the university. Once because I wrote a column in which I joked about the Chancellor of the university, who happened to be P.W. Botha, who was also the head of the National Party. And I made jokes about his health, and about how he was phoning to the SABC to tell them what to put on the news. You see, some things don't change that much. And so I was called in. The Vice Chancellor at the time was Mike de Vries. He said, are we going to throw you out of the university, and why shouldn't we throw you out? And I said, well, if you're a banana, you must be prepared to be eaten. If you're a sucker, you must be prepared to be licked. The Vice Chancellor, the Chancellor of the university is a politician, so he must be prepared to be mocked. So he wasn't very happy with that answer, but I wasn't expelled from the university. The other thing that is very interesting, when I was driving here and I was remembering this, the year after I was on the Marty, the deputy editor of the Marty, I was the editor of the glossy, I don't know if they still do it, it's the yearbook, the Stellenbosch Student. And I wrote in it, it was just in that year that we had the first protest march on Stellenbosch about the politics. And the thing that people protested about, and that we were also almost all expelled from the university for, was that we demanded that the racial segregation in the residences should stop. And I wrote in the editorial, somebody reminded me of this the other day, I didn't remember it before, that in 20 years' time, we will look back at this and think this is a bizarre and absurd thing to protest about, because it's so obvious that residences should not be racially segregated. So in some ways then, the university, I don't know the university that well anymore, because I don't, I'm not very active alumni of the university. After I left, I was like, I gave up on the university a bit. But in some ways it's changed radically, the university. I mean, in my class there were no black students. We were all in the LLB final year class, every single one of the students was a white student. Being English was considered to be a bit weird. Now obviously that is beginning to change, but I'm wondering whether in 20 years' time we will again think about the kind of protest that is happening here at Stellenbosch and think it's actually quite bizarre that we are that people protested about this, because it seems so obvious. And at the time, of course, for people who were governing the university, the Vice Chancellor, the management team, the SRC, protesting about segregated residences was they thought it was very revolutionary, and that those of us involved in it were actually unpatriotic, that we were troublemakers, all these kind of things. Of course, ironically, some of those members of the SRC who was very much opposed to us protesting are today members of parliament, but not for the DA, but for the ANC. So you make of that what you want. But given that, I think I wonder, if we think about what is happening at the universities, and it is at the moment, it's quite an interesting experience to be a lecturer at a university. As you might know, I'm at UCT, because it feels, both on the one side it's very exciting, because it feels like there's a possibility for people to rethink what the university ought to be. On the other hand, it feels a bit scary, because it's the older you get, I think the more one likes things not to change in any way. So, now, some of my colleagues, we sit in the tea room and they say, now I have to decolonize my curriculum. I don't know what decolonize is. What must I teach? Fanon didn't say anything about company law. How must I now deal with this? But so you can see it either as a bit of a threat. You can see it like, we don't know what to do. Our skills are not as dominant anymore. Or you can see it as an opportunity, and you can think, let's think about what students and ourselves how we will think about this moment 20 years hence. How will we think about this? Will we think that the demands of the students were radical demands? Will we think, oh, this is obvious that if you're a university on the African continent, you have to engage relatively seriously with the thinkers and with the experiences and the context of the African continent? I think we're probably going to think that, and not that there was a radical, that the students were very radical. Which brings me, you said that I should say something about leadership. I don't really know if I can speak about leadership because I am a little bit nervous about the whole notion of leadership. So I'll say something about that. I'm nervous about it because I often we talk about the world, we talk about our history as if only the leaders are the ones who made a difference and changed the world. It was Nelson Mandela and it was whoever, Sisulu and Tambo and Sobukwe, who changed South Africa. We don't think of the person who took part in a school boycott in 1988 somewhere in a small town. We don't think of all the small little protests and the small actions, the actions of people who we're never going to know about, that is not written in the history books, that actually pushed the then government of the day, the National Party, to realize for our own benefit, we better start changing something here. So it sounds a bit like a cliche, but it seems to me leadership is not like, it's everybody can be a leader. Anybody can change the world. And it seems to me often it starts very small. You can change your own environment in ways maybe more drastically than you would be able to do if you became a member of parliament and went to parliament. You can be thrown out of parliament and make a noise there, but is it going to change the world? Maybe it will make more of a difference if you stand up in the class and you ask the lecturer, but why are you teaching us this? I don't agree with that particular point of view, or I think that point of view is maybe problematic. I had a student the other day after the class who said, oh, we have another course. You know, some students complain to me about the other lecturers, so I'm not allowed to entertain that. So they say, I have another course and the lecturer teaches us bad things, and what must we do? So I said, well, why don't you tell the lecturer? Why don't you get all your friends in the class and you make a protest in the class? And she was like, are you telling us to protest? Yes, of course, please don't burn anything, but protest, yes, that I'm very much in favor of protest, because firstly, you're taking control of your own destiny and you're having agency. It's not like, oh, I'm sitting here, I have no say in the matter. And secondly, I think some of us lecturers, especially if you're a little bit older like me, you know, it's actually helpful to get to be challenged. I mean, in academic environment, a university is exactly the kind of place where you need to be challenged, where you need to rethink your things, so that you're not, if you're, as a lecturer, you shouldn't be, I don't think you should be one of those people who's still using the notes from 2001 in your lectures. I don't know if there are any, I'm not mentioning any names, or don't know if there are any people like that. And if sometimes it is easier to change and to rethink your own view about what you teach, how you teach, if you are challenged by students in the class. It really makes you think again about, oh, I never thought about this, or a colleague of mine the other day said, I was quite shocked that he said that, but he said he never realized that in the class it's usually all the English-speaking white people who speak up first. And he's never realized he needed to do things to make the class a space where different people can speak up. But this year it was a bit different. Everybody spoke, and he came to the tea room with big eyes. So that is really what I wanted to say, is that I think change is going to happen, and change often depends on people reflecting and thinking about it, and the university is the perfect way to do that. So even Stellenbosch University, who in some ways is quite conservative, I think, my perception of it as a university, it is definitely not the most progressive university in South Africa. Even here there's a critical mass of people, staff and students, who are interested in thinking about the issues, about how can we make this university really an interesting place to be at. So it's not as if it's impossible, the change is impossible. So that's really what I wanted to say. I don't know if that was more or less what you had in mind. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open the floor now for question and answer session. So there will be a roaming mic going the round. Then I'll go first.
Yeah.
Because you can. Because I can. I'm more interested in what do you think the role of alumni should be in a university, and what is your relationship with your students?
That is a difficult question. I don't know. I think it's difficult. The first question is easy to answer. As an alumni, I have to admit I'm not particularly involved in the university in any way. I have never been to the convocation. I have to admit that. It's like in a weekday, and they're going to talk nonsense. And so I haven't really felt, I don't know, it's like, I do many other things. I haven't really been involved in the university. I feel different about the university now than I did in the early 1990s, when I wrote the university a letter saying, stop sending me begging letters asking me for money, because I'm not giving you any money because you're a racist institution. I feel a little bit better about the institution now than I did in 1994, because I think the university is beginning to grapple with real issues. But I haven't really been an active alumni. Partly I have a good excuse for that, because I think the role that alumni play is often a destructive role. Because in a situation where an institution is in flux and where transformation and change is necessary, the alumni, or the majority of the alumni, and this is now a bit controversial, but I'll say it in any case, the majority of the alumni are perhaps a brake on change. If we think about the language policy at the University of Stellenbosch, what role is the alumni playing? Because the majority of alumni, they come from a certain experience, they come from a certain political place. And so in the context of Stellenbosch, the argument could be, well, I think maybe the alumni shouldn't play such a big role because they're going to be a brake on change. But to undermine myself a little bit, I would say that, okay, but as long as alumni do have a role, I guess people who perceive themselves to be a little bit more progressive, maybe they have a duty to also engage. Yes. So in theory, I think that I just haven't gotten around to actually doing it, because, yes. So that's how I would answer it.
Yes.
Surely we as alumni, we are progressive, liberal, and all of those beautiful words, we are to blame for the role that the non-progressive alumni is playing. Because by staying quiet and by minding our own businesses elsewhere, we are saying, after we can run Nokia or whatever, we are giving them permission. So then, what should the university do to get us to buy into the future of Stellenbosch as graduates of this institution?
Yes, you're asking difficult questions. You see, the difficulty is sometimes it can feel as if change is, in certain institutions are going to be difficult to effect, because if you have a body that is based on democracy and on voting, then you're not going to win an election in the US by being a Green Party member who's also a socialist. Bernie Sanders is not going to win the election. So, in the same way here, I was put up for the council of Stellenbosch for the alumni to vote for. I think I got the least votes of anyone. So, in that sense, yes. But it doesn't mean, so I'm a little bit skeptical about the official channels going to the convocation. But it doesn't mean that as an alumni you cannot speak up. You cannot say, I'm a Māori, I went to study at Stellenbosch University, I'm proud of being a Māori or whatever, but I don't agree with the chairperson of the convocation, I don't agree with this one, I think they are wrong, I think the university should do this, this and this. So making your voice heard and showing that there is a different voice out there, I think that is very important. The jury is still out at this particular juncture whether the official channels is the way to do it, and I'm not sure I should doubt this here with this or is at this particular event, but I'm just being honest. That is how I personally feel.
Yes.
Property False, first part is, are you going to vote for people from council or convocation to go to council?
Yeah.
Great. My actual question is, given that universities are inherently super hierarchical and super structural, how can a graduate or a current staff member or a current student, so those three constituencies, how can they play a role to say to whichever body, but actually you're contradicting what our vision would be, and how can those people, given, let's say, lack of agency because hierarchical and structural realities, how can they play a role to reimagine how we do power and how we do decision making in university, which is not very, or universities which are not very
Yes. On the first question, it's very easy. I've already voted. I didn't know who to vote for, so I just voted for all the black people. I don't know if that is the right thing to do, but I didn't know the people, so I thought, I'm not going to vote for these other ones with the grey shoes. So yes, so I've done my vote. I'm being very naughty today. On the second question, for some people, it will be easy to be heard, of course, because money talks. So the university has a tendency to listen to donors. I remember even when I was a student here in the 1980s, we were told, yes, it's not that we're so against the NUSAS or the End Conscription campaign or against the UDF, but the donors, they are going to stop giving us money if we don't ban this organization from the campus. Yes, we believe in free speech, but not that much free speech. So the donors, if you're a donor, you can make your voice heard in a way maybe that will make people stand up. Otherwise, I think it will be maybe helpful to organize groups of people, like-minded people, so that when something happens at the university, or organize people who's been alumni, who are alumni of this university, people who are known, people who are not known, and organize them in an informal group, so that if something happens, they can make a counter statement. Because if you're one alumni, if you're just one former student and you say, I don't think the university should do this, you know, the burger is never going to publish that unless you are really famous, you know, unless you're Karen Zoid or somebody, but they are not otherwise going to do that. But if you are 20 or 50 or 100 or 200 or 500 people, it becomes far more difficult. But of course, as you now heard from me, organizing alumni is not easy because we are like, oh, we have many other things to do. But I think that is, I would think that can help to change. On the hierarchy, good luck. Yes, I don't have an answer for that. It's a very difficult question.
Can I just ask you to use the mic just to the side?
Oh.
Professor De Vos, as a proponent of protests, I guess you might have thought about this, but in the 1980s, white students protested and fought for the rights of black students because black students weren't here themselves. Now, what about today? What is the role of white students? And how can we support something we believe in without making it about us?
That's a good question. When the students were, the day the students all went to Parliament, Fees Must Fall, my partner, who's a bit younger than me, was like, so we were discussing, are we going to join the protest? And we were like, we believe in this protest, maybe we should join. And then in the end, personally, I didn't go because I thought, if I go, my face is a little bit known among journalists, so I might, you know, it's not about me, so I didn't want to make it about me. So I would rather write things and, than be the person there. I don't think, but in a different context, when there was a protest march on the campus in which specifically the academics was also involved, I put on my red gown and I went to march in that because that was a different context. So I think it's context specific. I think it depends on the specific event and the specific action, and it also depends on methodology, on how one goes about things. You know, some of us have a tendency not to listen very nicely. We have a tendency to just tell other people what must be done. Soort van 'n baasmentaliteit. So it's important to, and there's sometimes for somebody who's at the university, who's a professor, you know, it's hard to remember you must try and be a bit humble and try and not push yourself in front and so on. And then, so but there's not an answer, an easy answer. It depends on from place to place, event to event, issue to issue, it seems to me, to what extent one can be involved. But I always think you can be involved in some way. You can be involved in giving people a lift, or you can be involved in, if you have a car, you can be involved in helping to hand out flyers. You know, there are many things that you can do that without being the one that put yourself in front. Yeah.
Yes. Machaleta?
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I have a bit of a question which is more practical.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we talk about, you know, this is how it works, blah, blah, blah. But there are very specific and simple things that I think, which is what makes a lot of black students angry, is especially people of a position of privilege. So there are a lot of simple, specific things that every individual can do, but they are not getting done. So my question is more on what is it that's keeping you academics, especially white academics who are from that position of privilege where you are listened to, what's stopping, for example, Stellenbosch Council decided to override a decision which was in conjunction with the Stellenbosch Senate. Now, Senate is the highest decision-making body as far as what happens in the classroom is concerned. What could possibly, on earth, being a 50-something-year-old, what's the threat to you to stand up and say, come on guys, it's not 1984. How can you revert a decision of us being cynical of what happens in the classroom after we agreed with the character management team, after we agreed with students, after we agreed with teams? Like, there are certain steps that it's not about, whether you're going to be at the protest. This is something that's facing you. Or say you're a lecturer and then the policy says you must teach exclusively in Afrikaans. That's if you're 55. What's stopping you to just say, come on, I'm just not going to do that? Because here, that's what it will take to change things.
Yeah.
The talk and the statutory, it's funny stuff.
Yeah.
We've spent a year doing that. It's not yielding anything. And then a Senate decision. In my entire life, I didn't think that was possible elsewhere in the world for a council to decide on what happens in the classroom and overrides it. So these are the everyday practical things.
Yeah. So in a way, it's a rhetorical question because I'm not at Stellenbosch. I think there's probably, if you ask the professors, they're going to probably invoke a certain rule, a certain management structures. The council has the final say. I don't know actually exactly how it works, but I assume that is what people will say. But I think it's probably often when people don't speak up when they know that, when they believe in something but they are told that they can't do it, is because people are afraid. They are scared. They are scared of losing their job or being vilified by others, being ostracized by colleagues, all those kind of things. So it takes a certain amount of courage to go against the stream. And yes, so that is the simple answer. And I have to say I have some sympathy for that, because I think the older you get, the more you have vested interest. Like, I have a bond to pay, I have a car installment to pay, I have this one to put through the university, I have to, whatever, all those kind of things. So I have sympathy that people will be scared. So, yes. So, but having said that, I think. Let me just leave it there. I don't really have an answer, another answer for that, except to say that, of course, in an ideal world in which we were all good people and brave people, we would not be that scared, and we would speak out more. I know, and let me make it just about myself. I know that the times that the Vice Chancellor has said at a social function that I just say whatever comes into my head, no matter what, and no matter what it means for the university. And I know that they monitor everything I write and tweet and whatever in case the brand management. But there has been times where I've criticized the management, and there's been times where I'm like, must I? It's hard. It's not so easy. Sometimes it's like, am I now really going to alienate all 60 other lecturers in this faculty by saying, no, the Vice Chancellor is wrong? So yes. So I'm not excluding myself from that. I'm not blaming somebody. Yeah.
Okay, if I may ask, 2 days ago we had a protest march organized by the EFF student movement, and then there were students from the AfriForum who were protecting the statue of Yanni Marais. Do you think that AfriForum should play any role in the university?
Well, I believe that we live in a democracy. So if AfriForum wants to organize, I don't believe that you can ban any organization. In the 80s, this university banned progressive institutions. The End-Conscription campaign and the New SAS was banned. We had to have our meetings off campus. There, near the Braak, there was a meeting hall there. I can't remember one. We were so excited because it felt finally we are making a difference here, because we discovered a listening device in the office. But in any case, so because maybe of that experience, I am very strongly in favor or against any kind of banning of institutions or organizations. Whether that organization plays a constructive role is of course a completely different matter. I don't think AfriForum is playing a constructive role. I think it just makes everything it touches worse. It riles up everybody. It has a tin ear. It doesn't understand the context, the South African context. It's oozing with white privilege. I really think it's an unhelpful organization, even if you are on that side of the argument, even if you a person who believe that the EFF is the devil incarnate. The way in which AfriForum operates, I just think, is strategically, from their own perspective, very dumb. And apart from the fact that I disagree with everything they stand for, yes. So, but that is a different argument. I think in a space like this, because there is some freedom at least. I mean, we are a bit constrained. Not everybody's voices are heard in exactly the same manner and so on. But what happens at Stellenbosch, it will be reported, people will know about it. And, you know, these kind of actions, there are ways of neutralizing it, yes, through the ordinary democratic process, which includes protests. Yes, when I say democratic process, I don't mean the procedural democratic process. I mean protest, whatever. Yeah.
Seeing that you are a constitutional law expert, what do you think is the correct procedure with regard to the Stellenbosch language policy, constitutionally speaking now?
Well, there are two issues involved here. The first issue is the constitutional issue about the right to higher education. And then the provision in the Constitution that says where it's reasonably practicable, you have a right to be taught in the language of your choice, your home language. Okay. I don't think that is a particularly difficult constitutional issue, in the sense that universities, there are only how many universities in South Africa? 20? 25 universities. So getting a place at the university that looks like this, that has all these resources, there's a competition for this. So every single student in South Africa who can go to university has been taught English. Every single student in South Africa who can go to university has not been taught Afrikaans or isiXhosa or Zulu. That's another story. Why that is, God only knows. But okay. So, and because of that, if you're going to have a policy in which any student is going to be excluded because they cannot speak Afrikaans, that is discrimination. And the jurisprudence of the Constitutional Court is pretty clear on this. Although they claim that the rights, there's not a hierarchy of rights, all the rights are equal, when it comes to the crunch, we know that one right is more equal than the others, and that is the equality, non-discrimination right. So if it comes, if the fact that it would be discriminating against people, and let's face it, it will be on the basis of race indirectly, because of that, I think that if you go to the Constitutional Court, the court will say, well, it is not, if it's going to be require a language policy which makes it impossible for a person who cannot speak Afrikaans to study at that institution, that is not a policy that is either demanded by the Constitution or even permitted by the Constitution, because it's not only whether you can demand it, is it permitted? It's not permitted because it discriminates unfairly against a certain group. If it is practically possible to have both Afrikaans and English, and given the costs involved and so on, so that no student will be forced to be taught in Afrikaans, yes, that would not be problematic from a constitutional perspective. The problem with that is, of course, money. Because how much does it cost to replicate everything? The reason, I think one of the reasons why the fight is happening here, and why many, like the law faculty, did make the decision we're going to talk only in English. I don't know where, have they rescinded that now? Oh, I don't know. But in any case, the reason is, well, otherwise I have to teach everything twice. Once in delicious English, once in beautiful Afrikaans. And so, yes, so there's a practical issue involved there. But if we take that off the table, there's nothing wrong constitutionally with having both Afrikaans and English. There is something wrong with having some courses only or partly in Afrikaans. Only in Afrikaans, completely or partly in Afrikaans, because that will be unfair discrimination on the basis of race, and I cannot imagine that any court, well, not the Constitutional Court, is going to find that that is a permissible policy. But then you have to go, of course, to the more complicated thing here now at Stellenbosch is the university has now already told the students this is what the policy is going to be. And so now the question is, do they have a vested right in being taught in Afrikaans, a legitimate expectation? So I think the technical argument that the AfriForum people want to make before the court, which probably is not a bad argument, I have to say, don't quote me on this, but is that there's already been an advertisement. The contract has been agreed to between students and the university that they will be able to be taught in Afrikaans, and so isn't there a legitimate expectation that you're now in breach of? So the university will have to deal with that, and they will have to solve that problem. Surely there are ways of solving the problem, yes, but it seems to me for the short term that is the legal issue, and that is going to go to court. We'll see what the courts say, but yeah.
Yes, if I may complicate that, having, like, it being okay to have
both English and Afrikaans in class, I would say, coming back to the question and the context that we are in, talking about decolonization, what would it say if you say, I want to, we're reasonably practicable, I want to offer people in their mother tongue, but also don't put English closer. So you're only concerned about English and Afrikaans. I'm not English speaking. It's a struggle to learn English to begin with. So if you're going to, I understand where you're coming from with the technicality, but then you can add another dimension to say, well, everyone has already made that sacrifice years ago, from the day they started school. And not to say you should therefore make the same sacrifice, but like, honestly, is it that important to you if it's going to stand in the way of somebody else? Like, it's fine if you wanted it, cool. I wanted to go, to the bathroom, but there's somebody who needs the bathroom first. Is it, if I can wait for 5 minutes for that person to go there, is it really, do I really have to just go?
Yes, it's a question really of leveling down or leveling up. It's what, there's a moral question involved, perhaps more than a constitutional or legal question, is that are we as a country going to choose a policy in which we are going to try and offer education in all the official languages to everybody? I think we have made a decision not to, for policy, for very different reasons, because English is just like it's like a parasite that goes everywhere. Now the question is, does that morally require a leveling down? Personally, but this is my personal view, I think it would require a leveling down, everybody English, if retaining Afrikaans is going to be in any way exclusionary. If the policy in any way is going to exclude people in law, in practice. Yeah. If not, I don't have a problem with it, because the Constitution wouldn't have a problem with it, because the Constitutional Court has said that when we think about equality, it's really about managing difference and the right to be different from anybody else, as long as your difference is not used to elbow other people out of the way. And that can be done obviously in a very formal way by only teaching in one language, or it can be done in more subtle ways by saying this institution, the culture of the institution is going to be one that is associated particularly with one group, and that's going to indirectly or subtly make other people feel unwelcome. So that would be the issue for me. It is not the fact of Afrikaans or English or Xhosa or whatever. It is, how do you manage then the diversity? Are you managing it in a way that is excluding, either directly or in an indirect way, or are you managing it in a way that is truly inclusive, which is a very difficult thing to do, because there's always a dominant culture and a dominant and so what Stellenbosch really needs to do, the dominant culture has to become one of multiculturalism. I'm not sure that the dominant culture is that yet. I don't know. I'm not here every day, but I would be surprised if it is like that. I know UCT is not like that yet. It is not a place where a specific way of being in the world is not valued more in all kinds of informal ways. And that is really the problem. We really have to rethink what is the culture that we want here, and who decides what the culture is. That for me is really what this whole fight is about. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk. Just picking up on the language issue, I teach, I'm a lecturer here at social anthropology, and you mentioned something about the resources available to teach in English and Afrikaans. And in our department, I guess only about half the members of staff can speak Afrikaans. And that's because when we're advertising for posts, we don't mention that you have to speak Afrikaans. And would that be illegal if we, is it actually, there's a presumption by the university that all lecturers can speak Afrikaans and English. And presumably, that's linked with this taken for granted assumption that if you're coming to Stellenbosch as a lecturer, you ought to be able to speak Afrikaans. Is it legal actually to advertise for lecturers saying that they have to speak Afrikaans? That's one thing. Just one other thing. As you know, last year that there were outsourced workers protesting, and the university came to an agreement and agreed that it would top up the wages of all outsourced workers to a minimum of 5,000. And 150 outsourced workers have lost their jobs as a result of participating in that action. What is the legality of that? Does the university have a legal or moral obligation?
Okay. Yeah, the second question more difficult. First question, the labor law says that, and also the discrimination law says, Equality Act says that if it's an inherent requirement for you to fulfill that task. If they advertise for an actor to play Othello, unless it's Hollywood, they're actually going to have a black actor to play the black person. It's an inherent requirement of the job. If you want to play Verwoerd as an actor, it will have to be a white actor. It's not racial discrimination. So it depends on whether it's inherently required for the lecturer to be able to speak Afrikaans for there to be such a provision. I suspect, given that the flux that the university is in, I'm not sure that it is an inherent requirement for the job. So it's open to discussion. But absent that, there would be no problem with just advertising that you have to be able to speak English, I think. Yeah. On the second question about that.
So, is it actually discriminatory? Is it illegal to advertise for a job? And if it's not actually a requirement, would it be discriminatory and illegal to advertise jobs saying you have to be able to speak Afrikaans to come here?
That's a difficult one because it will be discriminatory. It will be discriminatory in the sense, yes, but let me explain. If you make a distinction between people that is either directly or indirectly going to impact on a specific group that is mentioned in Section 9 of the Constitution, then it's discrimination. So if I use Afrikaans, or even if I require you have to be able to speak Afrikaans, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
You're saying for students, there shouldn't be
yes.
a requirement for students.
So if you ask if the requirement either in the advert or in the selection committee is you have to be able to speak Afrikaans to get an appointment, that would be discrimination in the sense that you would be excluding a group of people based on their language, which is discrimination, based on their race, because disproportionately the people that will be excluded will be black African people. And the question is that discrimination unfair? And that will depend very much again on what the requirements is for the lecturer. Is the university policy and everything so that you have to be able to go and teach in Afrikaans? If that is still the policy and that policy has not been declared invalid or it hasn't been changed, it would probably not be unlawful to require Afrikaans. If you can show that it is an absolute requirement of the job to be able to speak the language, given the policies that the university has in place.
The reality is that certainly in our department, only half the people can speak Afrikaans. So
well, that would make it much more difficult for them to make that argument, because now they will have to say, well, we've already appointed all of these people, so for those jobs it wasn't actually an inherent requirement. So now it becomes more difficult to make an argument that it is. They will have to say, well, we are making the argument because we need some people to teach the AfriForum children, and so if we only have English speaking people here, we won't be able to do that. You see what I'm saying? Whether that will work, I'm not sure. It will depend on the specific facts of the case. Yeah. On the second question of the outsourcing, I'm not a labor lawyer, so I'm not so sure. There are very complicated labor law issues with the outsourcing, which I'm not so it's not my area of expertise, so I don't really want to answer that and tell you something that is not true. Yeah.
Just going back to the equality and that you have to embrace difference without accepting that you're elbowing people out. What is your viewpoint then on the distinction between tolerance and accommodation? Because I know that is a debate that's been happening on campus as well, where certain groups feel that they are being tolerated and not really accommodated.
Yes.
So what is your viewpoint on
well, that is exactly why I said that the whole culture has to change. The culture has to become a culture of diversity, and because the difference seems to be, if you have tolerance, it is, well, we are the in-group, we are the dominant group, we are the group that actually decides, but out of the goodness of our hearts, we tolerate those who are not like us, because, we live in, it's now 2016, and we cannot discriminate anymore. But that's very different from saying, let's rethink about who is the group that decides, because politics is about who decides and who decides who's on the Senate, what are the rules, what are the habits of the institution based on what cultural precepts. And that is far more difficult to do, because now you will have to embrace the idea that not one group is the dominant group, that there's not one normal way of being in the world and then others can be accommodated in, tolerated within it. You'll have to question the whole idea of normality. In one of the Constitutional Court cases, the first one that the Constitutional Court dealt with sexual orientation discrimination, Justice Sachs wrote a beautiful thing about how the equality is about the right to be different, and how we should start questioning the idea that there's a norm, that everybody's heterosexual, but we tolerate gay people and lesbians. No, that is not the model. The model should be, well, we all have a sexuality, we're still deciding what it is. It's like open for discussion. And that is a very different model from, yes, we so love our gays because, they're good with the flower arrangement. Yeah, that gets up my nose. So I'm using specifically not the racial example, but exactly the same. This is exactly the same thing. Yeah.
So just going back to the language policy, and you said that from a constitutional point of view, if it wasn't for costs, if it could accommodate as many languages as possible, it would be legal. But given the demographics of Stellenbosch, but also in general the way language works in South Africa, wouldn't this be a risk leading to a form of segregation, de facto segregation? And does the Constitution, what does the Constitution
Yes. Well, that is exactly the problem of having only Afrikaans. Is obviously this is a moral problem, but it's a legal constitutional problem, because it will discriminate. The segregation will be based on discrimination. The policy will actually exclude people from coming here. But you're saying something different. I think that any university that's a good university is going to be a university that is going to make use of the resources of the country, including the diversity. So redress in terms of acceptance and admission, I think, is directly linked to the quality of the university. The more there are people from different experiences and backgrounds in the same class, the more that the students are going to learn from one another. Because, I don't know about you, but when I was here, I learned about 70 or 80% of all the things that I actually learned was not in the classroom. It was outside the classroom. It was with the student groups. It was late at night, drinking whatever. Let's not go there. So if there's I think it's just bad for the university to be segregated racially. I think any university who wants to be a good university is going to try and attract people, and they will make sure that the language policy is such that they will be able to attract that.
Sorry, I don't want to be misunderstood. What I meant is, if you have this language policy that accommodates as many people, it's going to create de facto groupings where basically all Xhosa speakers will go to Xhosa class, and then Afrikaans.
At Pretoria University, they had that issue. The students spoke, I was told by some of the lecturers there was the Afrikaans class and the English class. English class is actually the students who speak Sesotho and Setswana. The Afrikaans class is the white students. What has happened there, though, is, and that is one of the reasons, one of the things that upset the people who are very campaigning for Afrikaans, because what happened naturally, more and more people joined the English class, and the English class became the non-racial class. and the Afrikaans class became the segregated, racially segregated class. So, you know, so if you're going to have separate classes, there's always the problem of who decides. It's like having separate streams for different people. Some needs extra help. You know, it's all that. It's always fraught. But if we take the Pretoria example, though, it appears that over time, the demand for being taught in the language that is not internationally recognized dominant academic language is going to wane, and it's sort of going to sort itself out. Yeah. I'm saying that as a proud Afrikaans speaker. Ek is baie lief vir my taal, maar dit is die realiteit. Ja.
I've always been skeptical of this idea of a culture of multicultural.
Yeah.
Although I agree it's the ideal, it would be wonderful. Yeah. But do you have any examples of anywhere in the world that it's happened and even happened organically?
I don't know. Multiculturalism, you see, I think some people will hold up the US as an example. But if you look at it, it's not really multicultural. The whole metaphor of the country is there's a melting pot. You all throw it in the pot and then a stew comes out. But it's still a stew, it's not the individual pieces. So multiculturalism in the sense of having very distinct groups who are going to stay distinct in a very pronounced manner, I don't think that's probably not going to, I'm not sure that is what I mean by multiculturalism. It seems more like there will be differences. There are always differences between people. And what happens if people in a multicultural society that works better is people actually rub off on one another a little bit. You retain some of who you were, but you also become something different. Now the big problem with that is the dominant group, the group that is economically, socially, culturally dominant, they are probably going to be in a better position to be the ones to decide what this communal space will look like. And that is the problem with the multiculturalism. That's why I said you have to really, for it to work, you'll have to rethink the power relations, who decides, what is the norm. We have to change really the norm that is going to be the basis, the starting point. I don't think there's any place else. I can't think of the top of my head of another place where that works. But here we are in South Africa. We have to make it work somehow. I think what it requires is for each institution and each culture to become far less dominated by white people, because we are the minority. That's really what is the starting point of making it even remotely possible, it seems to me. What do I know, but that's just my idea.
Professor Vos, when we look at the equality clause in the Constitution and we look at the higher right to higher education, i.e. access and redress parts, which no one wants to read when they talk about our language, and we look at the Equality Act itself though, would you say it could be problematic if, say, a university that possibly had an intentional plan to exclude people who are not white does not in the year 2016 have a transformation plan actually, and more specifically seem to not want to have a transformation plan because, let's say, at this particular university A, as an example, 3 plans may have been rejected during the tenure of the previous rector. Would you say that is that lawfully permissible, and more specifically, is there a constitutional imperative?
Yes. Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden, Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke wrote there and said, Remember, our idea of equality is not the formalistic idea that people must be treated the same. It is about redress. It's a substantive equality idea that we want to get. Equality is it's a work in progress. We are not equal in any definition of the word. So equality is about trying to get to a place where people really have agency, where they really can make meaningful choices equally with one another. For that, Justice Moseneke said in that judgment, which is the first judgment that dealt, Constitutional Court judgment dealing with a redress measure, he specifically said that in some context, it might be constitutionally required to have redress. He didn't say which context. I would say, though, that in a context like where in a context where the link with past discrimination and exclusion is so strong, there is a very strong argument to be made that there is a constitutional and legal imperative requirement to take positive measures to address the effects of past discrimination that continues. Yes. So if I was the lawyer of Stellenbosch University, I will tell them that they might well have a problem if it goes to the Constitutional Court, because Section 7.2 says you have a duty to produce, not only to respect rights, but protect, promote, and fulfill. Justice Moseneke says it requires positive action. And so what have you done? Where's your plan? Positively to address the effects of past and ongoing discrimination in this particular context. So, you never know what the courts will say, and it depends on who the lawyers are. Do you get Wim Trengove or some other hopeless person? But it's, I think you can at least make a quite strong argument for that. Yeah.
Well, I think you can be a lawyer of the university. But then you said you are not involved with the university in any way. What will it take to have you on board?
Well, you see, I have criticized the university and the language policy. I wrote something on it, a few things, yes. I'm happy to, it's part of my job. This is the wonders of working for a place like UCT. There are aspects of liberalism that is good. So they appointed me and said, 25% of your day is to promote the Constitution, to come to events like this. So I'm actually working today. I'm earning my living. So it's like, it's like going to the chocolate factory, but okay. So in that sense, I do stuff if people ask me. Yeah. So let me put it that way.
What I'm trying to get is it about the university structure, or is it a personal choice to choose not to be involved with the university?
No. It has to do who and when and what. I don't want to spend my time making up the numbers or being a window dressing for decisions. If I try, and maybe it's like very big-headed of me, I hope not, but I think I have limited time and resources, so I'm going to spend my time on things where I think I can actually make a difference. So it depends entirely on the context. So if the university asked me, do you want to come and help us to draft an affirmative action policy? I will say yes. And then my partner will say, but you have to ask them whether they're going to pay you too. But yes.